Before we begin, tell me from what part of the world you're listening to this story. What you're going to feel now is incredible. The rain cut through the Istanbul sky that night as if time itself were mourning the fate of Amara. The door of the old convent creaked and resounded in the early morning as torches flickered in the darkness and shadows danced across the cold stone walls. The heart of Amara, as pure as the snow on the domes of the mosques, beat rapidly in his chest. His fingers trembled over the rosary, and a single tear delayed the silent path of her anguish on her pale face. The convent had always been her refuge, a place of silence, prayer, and routine. Sacred, where she believed that nothing bad could happen as long as she kept her faith. But the real world, cruel and relentless, was advancing towards the interior of its walls like a hungry predator. The echo of the hurried footsteps of the sisters, whispering in fear, mingled with the distant thunder. It was night. The storm and the wind seemed to announce the omen of a new era, an era of pain, renunciation, and trial. Amara, with her deep brown eyes, had never understood the malice of the world. He was innocent soul, accustomed to taking care of the gardens, feeding the birds, and comfort the younger sisters. She grew up with the promise that she would be the wife of God alone. But fate, that old enemy of pure dreams, had chosen another path. The mother, the superior, distraught and without options, hurried into Amara's simple room. "Child, come, Themament," she whispered, her voice choked with fear and sorrow. Amara knew that something was wrong. The rumors that circulated in the corridors in recent days spoke of unpayable debts, of threats from the Sultan, and an impossible choice. The empire demanded sacrifices, and that night she would be the sacrifice. The iron door creaked again, and soldiers in golden robes burst into the cloister with brutality. The commander, with an icy stare and relentless, he announced, "Sultan Malik demands his offering. We have no time." Thainans retreated in terror. Some fell to their knees. Others hugged Amara as if they could protect her from a hurricane about to sweep everything away. Amara, paralyzed, felt her soul was torn to pieces. A supernatural chill invaded his body. "Why should I, God, why?" I thought, not having the strength to utter a single word. The rosary fell to the ground, and each bead seemed like a silent scream. The mother knelt down, kissing her forehead. "Forgive us, daughter. The world is cruel to the pure." Outside, the storm raged. Amara was swept away without the right to choose or understand. The path to the carriage was short, but for her it was like crossing an abyss. He smelled the damp earth, heard the sisters' subdued voices, and recorded every detail. The last goodbye to the only home I had ever known. The journey was long, marked by sharp silences and menacing stares from the guards. Amara, wrapped in a simple cloak, prayed softly, trying to cling to what little hope remained. He knew who Malik was, the feared Sultan, capable of deciding the destiny of thousands with a single gesture. They said his gaze was stone, his soul of steel. He was still young, but his face already bore the marks of power and loneliness. Amara knew little about men and even less about desire, but something inside her was trembling. It wasn't just fear, it was an unknown, terrifying sensation, a feeling that her life would never be the same again. Upon arriving at the palace, Amara was greeted as if was a precious and at the same time disposable object. The cold marble under her feet, the endless corridors decorated with gold, everything seemed to scream how small she was. The women of Sand, they looked at her with contempt and curiosity. Who was that girl with a blank stare and a fragile body? A threat, a naive one. The palace was a labyrinth of opulence and danger, where every gesture could be interpreted as a challenge or a submission. Amara didn't know it, but she had already been chosen. Maliki wanted a nun, a virgin, someone who had never tasted sin, a whim, an obsession. No one dared to ask. The Sultan, of austere appearance with a well-trimmed beard and eyes as dark as night, he watched her from afar. In her, he saw another trophy, a way to reaffirm his power to the world. But deep down, there was an emptiness, a repressed desire, hidden under layers of pride, pain, and loneliness. Amara, without knowing it, began to awaken dormant feelings in the heart of the Sultan. And as night fell over Istanbul, a new chapter of this story, a chapter of fear, courage, desire, and redemption. It was then that Malik ordered, "Prepare her for tonight." The cold ran through Amara's body. from head to toe. In the depths of her eyes, a glimmer of hope, or perhaps from desperation. It was impossible to know. The palace maids surrounded Amara, leading her silently through corridors of golden shadows. Hands, the cold weather stripped her of her modest clothing, replacing the simple convent fabric with a red silk dress. Intense, more daring than anything she had ever dreamed of wearing. Silk seemed to burn against her skin. Every touch of the fabric was a painful reminder that her world had been ripped out mercilessly. "Don't be afraid, child," one of the women whispered in a low voice, but full of regret. "Here everything is decided by Malik's wish. Keep your tears for when you're alone." Amara looked at her reflection in an ornate mirror with precious stones. He didn't recognize himself. Instead of the booted nun, he saw a frightened young woman dressed for sacrifice. The tear-filled eyes were of someone who didn't know where to find refuge, neither in God nor in men. The smell of incense, the light golden light of the lamps, the oppressive silence of the arena. Every detail of the preparation was a reminder of what that was about to happen. The maids braided her hair, adorning it with gold threads. One of them, the oldest, leaned over and whispered to Thyr, "Remember, girl, no one can take your heart. Only you decide who belongs to her." But Amara was paralyzed. Between desire and fear, she felt a silent anger against fate, against God, against all those who decided for her. "Why me? Why what to me, Lord?" The doors of Malik's chamber opened. The Sultan, he was sitting in a scarlet velvet armchair, surrounded by translucent curtains that created atmosphere of mystery and temptation. He stood up when he saw her, and his eyes scanned every detail of Amara's body. There was desire, but also something else. A look of a wounded predator, someone who had lost too much before becoming king. "Come closer," Malik ordered in a serious, firm as steel. Amara, hesitant, took a few steps, feeling that the ground disappeared beneath her feet. The Sultan stopped in front of her, studying every gesture, every tremor of her delicate hands. The silence between them was almost unbearable, full of expectation, fear, and a silent electricity. "Tell me, what's your name?" Malik asked, not as a curious man, but as someone who wished to dominate even the soul. Amara's voice, it came out thin, shaky, but it didn't break. "Amara, Amara," he repeated. "Sultan," as if testing the flavor of the name on his lips. "Do you know why are you here?" She just shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. Sultan moved even closer. The air was filled with spice and power. "Today you belong." The sentence was a judgment. Amara felt her legs weaken. His heart cried out for mercy. But the night did not listen to his prayers. Inside, a whirlwind of emotions, shame, fear, self-hatred for weakening, for wanting to return to the convent, for not understanding what was happening in his own body. The Sultan extended his hand and gently caressed her face. The touch, instead of calming her, inflamed a new fear and a strange warmth. For a moment, Malik hesitated. There was something in that innocence, in that forced surrender that disconcerted him. He was the owner of one woman, but never of a truly pure soul. And there, in front of Mara, he felt a distinct desire domination. Yes, but also of something that I would never confess, of being seen, of being forgiven, of being loved by someone incapable of lying. Time seemed to stand still. The storm wind roared outside, as if it wanted to invade the chamber and rescue Amara from her cruel fate. Malik paced in circles, studying his prey. "You fear me, don't you?" he asked, almost amused, but with a dark tone. Amara responded with disarming honesty. "I fear what I don't know." The Sultan smiled a mirthless smile. "Then, this will be a night of discovery." With a gesture, he moved the maids aside, ordering silence. Now they were alone, face to face, destiny and sacrifice, king and prisoner. Amara tried to pray silently, but her mind was blank. She wanted to ask forces, wanted to disappear, wanted to turn into stone. But life does not allow escapes to one who was already chosen by suffering. The Sultan stroked Amara's hair, tangling his fingers, as if searching for something lost inside her. "You're not like the others," she murmured. "Why do you hate me without even knowing me?" She didn't answer. She just bit his lip to hold back a sollozo. Malik bent his face until his eyes were level with hers, and for a moment the tyrant's mask fell. There Amara saw a man alone, wounded, seeking redemption in the midst of the shadows. But there was no time for mercy. The night was advancing, and the Sultan's will was law. When Malik led her to the fact, Amara felt her soul split in two. He wanted to fight. He wanted to scream. But all he could do was close his eyes and pray for the pain to end, soon, there. Between silk and fear, a story was born that no one could have imagined, I dare say. The silence that fell over the room was as thick as a smoke screen. Amara felt the weight of that gaze that mixed power, desire repressed, and a shadow of loneliness as deep as the abyss itself. Sultan Malik's fingers ran over it with slowly across her face, tracing a line of fire on her skin. Fear and shame were so strong that they drowned any thought of escape. The Sultan seemed determined to prove his authority, but there was something in his gestures that oscillated between dominance and doubt. He brushed a strand of hair away from Amara's face, studying her reactions, trying to decipher that expression of untouched purity, that gaze that still shone with the last spark of faith. Amara couldn't meet his gaze. She stared at an invisible point, counting the beats of his own heart, silently praying that it was all just a nightmare. Malik didn't. He was a man used to backing down from nothing, but as he touched Amara, he felt his own control slip away. Fingers. He wanted power. He wanted to dominate, but there was a delicacy in that instant that disarmed him. The Sultan struggled with himself, with anger, and with the need to show the world that no one was immune to her will. Amara was the purity that the empire never could buy. And it was there, between desire and doubt, that Malik understood that that night would not be like the others. She felt his hands slide over her shoulders, hesitant for a second, like if the Sultan were to question her own intentions. Amara kept her eyes closed, biting her lips, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. His heart pounded inside his chest, a mixture of panic, rage, and a strange feeling I'd never felt before. A spark of something forbidden, a heat that tried become desire, but was crushed by pain and fear. Malik noticed the tears running down his Amara's face, although she did not cry out loud. The Sultan, for a moment, he almost stepped back, but the desire to prove to himself that he was still in control was stronger. Pride, loneliness, and the need to be feared overcame any compassion. He pulled Amara towards him, feeling the tension in every muscle of her body, and allowed the night to unfold between silk sheets and muffled sighs. At first there was only discomfort, shame, fear. Amara, completely disconnected from her body, she tried to take refuge in the memories of the convent, in the voices of the sisters, in the smell of the gardens after the rain. But it was impossible. Every caress it was a shock. Every gesture of the Sultan was an invasion of everything she was, everything she believed. Malik was not abrupt, but it wasn't tender either. He was fighting his own internal battle, trying to quell the emptiness, searching his body a comfort to the tormented soul. The room was filled with a strange, dense, almost unbearable energy. There was desire, yes, but also guilt, the weight of an invisible violence, the mark of an encounter between two worlds destined never to understand each other. When the night finally gave way to absolute silence, Malik walked away without a word. He left Amara alone, stripped of everything, of the veil, of faith, of hope. She remained motionless, staring into space. The shame was so intense it burned inside. She wanted to scream, but her voice wash had vanished. He tried to pray, but no words seemed enough. Tears fell silently, each one like a dead rose petal thrown into the air, the foot of a desecrated altar. When the sun began to rise, Amara was still. I woke up. My body felt sore, my soul broken. I didn't know if I could endure another day, but somehow something inside her still held on. Maybe it was faith. Perhaps the survival instinct, or maybe just the desperate need to believe that it wouldn't be the end of everything. Malik, for his part, couldn't sleep. Sitting on his private chambers, he looked at his own hands as if searching in them for an answer to the emptiness that consumed him. The empire was at his feet, but he had never felt such brutal loneliness as at that moment. He thought of Amara, of her fragility in her terrified look. He thought about what he had done and how much he hated himself for feeling guilty. He wished he could take it back, but the pride was an ancient poison that brooked no weakness. At dawn, the maids found Amara aside with their eyes open, fixed on the ornate ceiling. One of them came closer and tried to talk to her, but Amara didn't respond. She had no strength. It was carried, almost like a child, towards a bath of herbs and perfumed oils, felt comfort, only humiliation. For days, Amara lived like a ghost in the palace. He ate little, spoke even less. His prayers were mute, her thoughts cloudy. The other women in the arena looked at her with contempt and even envy, whispering about the night of the Sultan and the nun. Neither of them knew the real pain that Amara felt, the death of her own dreams, the desperation for a future she didn't dare to imagine. The Sultan, for his part, immersed himself even more in his duties. He ordered punishments, planned wars, settled disputes, but nothing was enough to silence the voice that echoed in his mind. The memory of Amara's look before everything was taken from her. He didn't want to worry. I wanted to forget her like I had all the others. But I couldn't. Something about her, something that challenged him, that made him feel smaller than he really was. Time passed slowly. Amara, little by little, began to notice changes in her body, a dizziness waking up, a strange feeling of nausea, a delay I couldn't ignore. Fear turned to panic. She sought out the oldest maid, a woman who'd already seen many secrets within those walls, and revealed his suspicions to her. The maid confirmed what Amara was already afraid. She was pregnant. The news spread quickly, reaching the Sultan's ears. Malik, upon hearing this, showed no joy. He felt anger, contempt, and irrational fury. He didn't want a child, not with a nun. The presence of that child was a reminder of what he hated most about himself. The inability to control his fate, to be truly free from the past, ordered that Amara be isolated, kept away from the eyes of the palace. And so the young nun found herself alone, carrying within her the fruit of a cruel night, without knowing if she would have strength to survive her own pain. The palace, which had once been a labyrinth of gold and intrigue, had now become a prison of invisible walls for Amara. The days dragged, each one heavier than the last. The isolation was cruel, and the loneliness suffocating and rejected. She was kept away from everyone, in a silent wing where only the oldest maids entered, those who knew how to keep secrets so dark as the corridors of that empire. The news of the nun's pregnancy had spread like poison. The whole arena was murmuring, spreading rumors full of resentment and insinuation. Some women thought that Amara was lucky to be carrying the Sultan's son, but most wished that the scandal would destroy her. No one dared to approach her, no one addressed her. A word of comfort, only looks of contempt, poisonous whispers, and laughter off. At first, Amara tried to resist. She searched in prayer for the consolation that he no longer found in his own soul. He felt nauseous, dizzy, body tired and heavy. Still, he knelt in front of the small window in his room. He recited prayers she whispered, trying to convince herself that God still heard her, even in that forgotten place. The nights were still worse. The absolute silence was only broken by the sound of his labored breathing, by the muffled pits in the pillow. She missed the sisters at the convent, the smell of freshly baked bread, the garden where she spoke with the butterflies. Now all she had was fear and cold. The Maydald woman, 8, was the only one who showed a bit of compassion. Every time she brought food or medicine, he would sit next to the bed, hold her hand firmly, and murmur words in his ancient language. A story of resilience, faith, and women who had survived worse storms than this one. "You carry a life inside you, child," Itan said, his eyes moist. "Don't let them kill your hope. The whole world may hate you, but this one, no child. This child is only yours." Those words were a balm for Amara, although brief. However, Sultan Malik never came. Since the announcement of the pregnancy had disappeared from her life as if she were burdened with an unforgivable sin. Not a letter, not a look, not a single word. The abandonment hurt more than the worst humiliation. In the arena, they celebrated their fall. They wove intrigues. They sowed lies in the ears of the Sultan's advisors. They said that Amara was pretending purity to gain power, who had bewitched Malik with fake tears. Among the Sultan's favorites, a woman stood out for the venom of her words. Safil. Safil envied the Amara's position. She had dreamed of giving the Sultan an heir. Now she saw in the nun's fall an opportunity to get closer to Malik. What kind of mother will that girl be? Safil said, spreading doubts in every corner. A woman without experience, without noble blood, does not deserve a place among us. Those words flew through the palace like daggers. The murmurs reached Mara, who felt each phrase like a stab. Fear grew. How would she protect her baby if no one wanted her presence there? How would she face childbirth alone? Without friends, without family, only with the cold walls and the harsh stares of the maids? Months passed. Amara's belly grew, but her hope diminished. He felt increasingly weak, his feet swollen, his face paler. He suffered alone every pain, every nausea, every sleepless night. Sometimes she thought about giving up. She even prayed for God to take his soul. But every time she felt the baby move, a fierce instinct made her resist. One night, during a storm reminiscent of the day she arrived, Amara had a nightmare terrible. She saw herself alone in a garden, holding a baby that was crying without Caesar. Women laughed in the distance, pointing at her, saying that child would never be loved. He woke up sweating, his body shaking with fear. Aten, who was sleeping in a chair, woke up with a start. "What happened, girl? Don't you want my son?" Amara murmured, crying like never before. "I'm afraid they'll hurt him." He hugged her tightly, whispering that nothing would happen, that he would fight to the end to protect her. But deep down, they both knew how cruel the palace could be, especially to the innocent. Meanwhile, Malik sank into his work, increasingly distant from any trace of humanity. The birth of a son, which should have been a source of pride, was felt as a punishment, a threat to his pride. Every time he thought of Amara, he felt anger towards her, towards himself, towards the destiny. Why did that woman destabilize him? Why did the birth of that child provoke fear instead of power? To silence those questions, he immersed himself in meetings, trials, and political decisions, removing any memory of tenderness or doubt. Time continued its relentless course. Amara was almost at the end of her pregnancy, increasingly tired, the pains more frequent, the exhausted body, but now more than ever he felt the need to resist. That baby was all she had left. Though hated, though abandoned, he silently promised to protect that life, even if it meant protecting it with his own existence. One afternoon, sitting by the window, she felt the child move violently. She placed her hand on her belly and with tears in her eyes spoke out loud to the baby for the first time. "Don't be fear, my love. I will protect you even if the whole world wants to destroy us. No, you're alone, my son, I swear." Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, a harbinger of another storm. The palace remained deaf to the pain of Amara, Safil, the favorites, the advisors, everyone was planning to keep. The nun was forgotten. But inside that room, the flame of hope still struggled to burn out. The moment of birth was approaching. Amara knew that very soon she would face his greatest test, and that perhaps, just perhaps, he would find in that pain the first step towards redemption. The night of birth came silently, full of a suffocating tension. The sky, covered with dark clouds, seemed to announce the final storm. Inside the isolated room, Amara felt the first wave of pain cut through her body like a blade. Fear turned to panic. Alone, with only one side, he knew he would face the greatest challenge of his life, bringing the world into the world, an unwanted child, in an atmosphere of hatred and abandonment. The pains intensified, each contraction a cruel reminder of all that had been taken from her. With firm hands and brave eyes, I prepared hot water, clean sheets, and herbs, trying to calm Amara with stories of other women, of babies who conquered death. But with each stifled cry, the palace remained deaf. No one from the arena appeared to help. The other women watched from a distance, hoping that the young nun would not resist, that the child would never see the light of day. In the Sultan's heart, Malik was silent. Hours passed. Amara screamed, prayed, begged, strength. She felt broken, lost between life and death, not knowing if God was still listening to her. Ate did everything possible to keep hope alive, wiping her sweat, stroking her hair, whispering words of faith as he held her hand tightly. "Don't give up, baby," Aten murmured, tears hidden in his eyes. "That baby will be born and will be your light." The birth was long, exhausting, marked by pain extreme and a suffocating anguish. At times, Amara thought that she would not survive. He wanted to disappear, flee the world, give in to despair. But when the exhaustion threatened to convince her, she felt within herself an unexpected strength, a life that claimed her exist, an inexplicable energy that transcended suffering. It was the silent promise he had made to Hare's son, the fierce instinct of a mother who, brave, would not give up. In the final moment, when her last cry was lost between the cold walls, a sharp cry filled the room. Sound pierced the night like a ray of hope. Eitan held the baby in his arms wrapped in sheets with tears falling down his wrinkled face. "It is a boy, Amara, a beautiful, perfect boy." Amara's chest burst with emotion. Fear, joy, relief, and panic mixed in an uncontrollable storm. She reached out her arms and welcomed her son for the first time. She felt his warm skin. He heard his cry, saw his closed eyes, his small hands opening in the air. "My son, my angel," she whispered, hugging him with a strength she never thought she had. All the pain, all the losses, all the shame seemed to vanish before that small miracle. For a moment, the whole thing ceased to exist. There were only mother and son, two survivors in a hostile world. Eitan carefully cleaned the baby, gave Amara herbs to regain her strength, and stood guard, fearing that someone would try to separate them. Hours passed. The baby's cry, now softer, was music to Amara. Fatigue threatened to surrender her, but she resisted. She knew that the real danger had not yet arrived. At dawn, when the timid sun tried to break through the clouds, AA retinue appeared at the gate. They were the Sultan's guards with direct orders from Malik to obtain news of the delivery, ensure that everything was kept secret, and remove any curiosity from the arena. The commander entered, observed the mother and child, registered the birth with indifference, and left without uttering a single kind word. Amara felt the contempt, the coldness, the indifference of power. She knew she was invisible to everyone except the creature he held. Malik's name was not spoken. There was no visitor, no signs of interest or affection. The Sultan wanted distance. He did not wish to befother. The following days were a mixture of fear and tenderness. Amara took care of the child with all the love possible, breastfeeding him, cradling him, whispering promises of protection. While Aytun, she watched over both of them, always alert to the dangers that lurked around them. The boy was strong, despite the adversities. She had the deep gaze of her mother, but also the undeniable mark of her father. The other women, defeated by Amara's strength, they began to look at her with new eyes. Some, still cruel, continued with their intrigues. Others, defeated by the courage of the young, they began to secretly admire the resilience of that lonely mother. But fear never left Amara. Safil, driven by jealousy and desire, out of revenge, she continued spreading poison, trying to convince advisors and maids that the baby was a threat, that she should stay away from Malik, that the nun was planning to usurp the throne. The nights were filled with whispers, doors closing, footsteps in the hallways. Amara, exhausted, she refused to sleep deeply. She was afraid of waking up and not finding her son by her side, wrapped him in blankets, hid him when he heard strange voices, asked Itu to pray with her to ward off evil. The love she felt for her son was a strength, but with each new rumor, with each veiled threat, his faith trembled. In the arena, the intrigue reached its peak, taller. Some counselors began to debate the child's future. They said that if Malik did not want it, the child's fate would be in the hands of the palace. Amara heard a maid say in a low voice that there was a risk of separation, that they could take their son away from her. Rage grew in the young mother's chest, would allow them to take away the only reason she kept fighting. She swore to herself that if they tried, I would do the unthinkable. I would run away. I would face any threat, but never ever would abandon his son. Meanwhile, Malik remained distant, pretending, ignore the birth. But inside, the memory of Amara and the child was beginning to cause cracks in his wall of pride. At the end of that night, Amara looked at her son, dried her tears, and whispered a promise to her. No matter what happens, I'll never leave you. Not even death could separate us. Fate, however, was preparing a new twist. Someone very soon would force Malik to face what he always avoided, his own son. In the heart of the palace, rumors spread like fire in a dry field. The birth of Sultan Malik's son was a secret only to those who wished to ignore the truth. Counselors and generals argued in low voices. Aaron's favorites plotted in silence, each with her own interests and fears. However, in the midst of that storm of intrigues, only one truth remained absolute. Malik refused to see the baby. For days, 18 insisted that someone high-ranking come see the child, but the doors always remained closed in on her. Amara, despite her suffering, tried not to lose her temper. Hope. Her son's gaze was her strength. Every morning she watched him sleep. She touched his face and promised that she would never abandon him, but the weight of abandonment was brutal. The Sultan locked himself in his chambers, surrounded by papers, maps, gifts sent by other kingdoms. Whenever someone mentioned the son, Malik reacted coldly, ordering silence. He didn't want to hear anything about that creature. His wounded pride, he spoke louder, drowning out any possibility of sympathy. No one dared to confront him, not even the senior advisors. But the days passed and the pressure increased. A sultan needed heirs. He had to show strength to the empire. The birth of a son, even though the fruit of a night of desire and rage, could not be hidden under the carpets of the palace. Safil, ambitious and cunning, took advantage of Malik's indifference to sow distrust. "I heard that the child has light eyes, like the traders of the north," he whispered to the guards and maids, casting doubt on the baby's origins. "Perhaps he isn't even the Sultan's son," others hinted, fanning the embers of rebellion. These rumors reached ears of the imperial council. One morning, the Grand Vizier knocked at the door of the royal chambers. His posture was rigid, his voice calm, but there was firmness in your words. "Your Majesty, the empire demands proof of your lineage. We cannot keep the child hidden." The cities murmur, the allies press. The people need to see their heir. Malik looked at the horizon with hard eyes like stone. Inside, however, he was fighting a fierce battle. He wanted to reject the child, he wanted to feel nothing, but something inside him was beginning to crack, a silent doubt that I couldn't silence. "I don't have time for children," he murmured without looking at the vizier. The Grand Vizier insisted, this time more close in a low voice. "If you don't take the child in your arms, others will. Power does not accept a vacuum. Your Majesty, your people need a symbol, not a secret." Silence fell like an axe. Malik felt the blow but didn't show. Arrogance was his armor, contempt his shield. However, something in the vizier's tone resonated in her mind for hours. Meanwhile, Amara lived under threat constant. Several rumors about the possibility of the baby being taken reached her. In the arena, the women watched her with hungry eyes, longing for weakness, for carelessness. In her solitude, Amara sought protection only in faith and in Ait. His son, for his part, grew strong despite the adverse conditions. He had a serene but intense gaze, a calm that seemed to defy even the chaos of the palace. One stormy night, Amara woke up to hurried footsteps in the hallway. She felt her chest tighten, fearing the worst. Aiton quickly got up and went to the door. On the other side, a nervous royal messenger announced in a low voice, "The Sultan wishes to know about the child. He wants to know if he's alive, if he's healthy." The news, instead of bring comfort, caused more unrest. Amara feared that it was just the beginning of something bigger, a test, a preparation to separate them. Still, he felt a flame lit in his chest. Perhaps there was hope. Perhaps Malik was beginning to give in. The next day, a palace doctor was sent to examine the baby. Cold assessments, mechanical questions, hurried fingers, and notes in parchments. The diagnosis was clear. The child was healthy, strong, different from those of the R. The doctor informed Malik, who listened silently with the face unchanged. Inside, Malik felt a chill. He tried to turn away image of the baby. He tried to convince himself that he didn't feel anything, but the memories, they returned from that night. Amara's purity, her frightened gaze, the silent strength he found in her. It was as if all that, although buried, was being reborn within him. Anger, once directed at the nun and fate, was now turned against himself. That same night, Malik walked through the dark corridors, feeling the weight of the palace on their shoulders. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by his own breathing. He stopped at the door of the wing where Amara was isolated. The desire to open the door, looking into his son's eyes, almost defeated him, but he turned his back, unable to face the past, unable to accept his own future. Days afterwards, the council met again. pressuring Malik with news from outside, rumors of a coup, threats of treason, doubts about the legitimacy of his throne. The Sultan understood that if continued to reject the son, everything could fall apart. Fear began to creep into her chest and for the first time felt the desire not only to protect the empire, but to look at that child, to face the truth. The next morning, Amara woke up to an unusual murmur in the halls. Aitna entered the room distressed and took her hand tightly. "It's going to happen, child. The Sultan will come to see your son today." Amara's heart raced. For a moment she felt fear, shame, hope, and anger all at the same time. Would that be the opportunity to show the world the value of your child, or would it be the beginning of a new sentence? The sound of footsteps echoed loudly. Outside, Malik was preparing to face the truth. The meeting that would change everything was about to happen. The hours passed slowly, each minute bringing with it unbearable anguish. Amara, with her son in her arms, tried to calm the heart racing. Every sound in the hallway seemed like an omen. She stood nearby, praying softly, watching the door with a protective gaze, ready to defend mother and son with the little power he had. The whole palace felt the tension, the maids murmured. The counselors spied from the shadows. Safil and the favorites exchanged glances of envy, preparing new intrigues in case the Sultan finally accepted the child. The fate of that little being and of Amara would make up her mind in the next few moments. The door creaked slowly. Malik appeared on the threshold, accompanied only by the Grand Vizier and 2 guards. His expression was unreadable. His gaze fixed, his shoulders tense. Inside, a storm of emotions. I didn't know what to expect. Anger, repulsion, indifference, or worse. The fear of being touched by such a small life and so defenseless. Aitin moved aside, leaving the path clear. Amara, lying on the bed, she huddled even further, protecting the child against her chest. The baby slept, serene face, delicate features, but there was a strength in it that, even asleep, seemed to defy one's own sultan. Malik took one step, then another, fighting pride and shame. He stopped in front of the bed. He looked first at Amara, pale skin, tired eyes, expression of pure courage. Then, with a gesture almost involuntary, he bent down to look at his son. Time seemed to freeze. Sultan, the one who never doubted, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His gaze fell on the child's face, so small, so real. Malik held his breath. There was something inexplicable there, an invisible bond, a power that no war, wealth, or law could control. For an instant, the pride burned silently, threatening to explode into rejection. But then the baby moved, opening its dark eyes. Eyes so similar to those of Malik, deep as the night, curious, innocent. The child looked straight to the father without fear, without judgment, without resentment. Just life. The Sultan, he shuddered. Something inside him, dormant for years, awoke with a force overwhelming. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shame, it was an unexpected tenderness. An absurd desire to protect, to be better, to rebuild everything that had been destroyed. It was love, raw, terrifying, forbidden. The Grand Vizier, attentive to the slightest gesture, observed insolence, hoping that Malik wouldn't let his pride get the better of him. The guards exchanged glances, sensing the impact of that moment. Mara felt the atmosphere change. She saw Malik's eyes wet for a brief second. There was no king there, but a naked Manto, his own fate. "He's strong," Malik murmured hoarsely, surprised of himself. The baby responded with a slight smile, squeezing Amara's hand as if to say, "I'm here. Don't be afraid." The repressed desire, that the stifled need to love and be loved, burst forth in the Sultan's chest. For years, Malik had hidden his own pain under layers of power and loneliness. Now, in front of her son, everything seemed insignificant. She wanted to touch the baby, but hesitated, afraid of breaking the purity of that moment. Amara, in a low but firm, he spoke. "He needs his father, not a king, but a man." The phrase, it pierced Malik like an arrow. For a long moment, it remained motionless. I wanted to deny it, run away, blame fate. But I couldn't. That truth was greater than any title, more powerful than any fear. With trembling hands, Malik finally reached out arms. Amara hesitated but handed the son to the Sultan with tears falling down her face. His face. The boy looked at his father silently, curiously, and Malik felt the warmth of life in his hands. The world disappeared. The weight of mistakes, of wars, of rejection, everything faded before that inexplicable connection. The Sultan wept silently, tears falling on Thesmal, feeling her own soul reborn. Eight, moved, withdrew even further, knowing that he was witnessing the birth of something impossible to describe. The Grand Vizier moved, slowly left, leaving the family alone. Malik hugged his son gently. He smelled the heat, the pulse of life. For the first time, he wanted something more than power. He wanted to be worthy of that love. He looked at Amara with a broken voice. "Forgive me for everything." She nodded tearfully. There was no more room for him there. Pride only for a possible future. The silent scene was witnessed only through the walls of the palace. But at that moment, a new story began, Toto right to each other. Aron's favorites, frustrated, realized that there was nothing they could do against that bond. Safil, furious, swore revenge. But deep down, she knew the Sultan would never be the same. In the following days, Malik visited his son again whenever he could. He sat next to Mara, learning how to be a father, discovering the pleasure of caring. The child laughed, grabbed his fingers, and returned the Sultan something he thought was lost forever: hope. Amara, now respected, regained his strength. He knew that challenges would come, that the palace would not give up so easily in the face of the happiness of a lonely mother and a redeemed king. But he was no longer afraid. She had at her side the man who had transformed pain into tenderness. Time passed, and the intrigues of the palace changed their target. But for Malik, all that no longer mattered. There was found in his son and in Amara the redemption he sought all his life. News of the silent miracle spread throughout the palace, not because of the shouts, but because of the sudden silence of intrigues, by the wavering respect of the servants and by the retreat of the favorites. Something had changed. Malik was no longer just the ruthless Sultan, but also the man who had learned to love his own son. The days became lighter for Amara, not because the difficulties had disappeared, but because the fear lost its strength. Malik began to visit them every day. He brought with him not just gifts, but gestures. He carried his son in his arms, fed him, walked with him through the garden hidden from the poisonous gaze of the sand. Amara watched many times moved, other times fearful, fearing that happiness would be ephemeral, an oasis about to vanish in the desert of power and vanity. One morning, Malik sat next to Mara on the flower-covered stone bench. The child was sleeping in his arms. The Sultan remained silent for long minutes with the staring into the distance until he finally said, "I never thought that could feel something like that." Amara didn't respond. She just looked at him. The silence between them was full of meaning, pain, fear, forgiveness, and a hope that was born slowly, like the sun after the storm. Malik turned around, looking for his eyes. "I was a monster, Amara. I was weak, cowardly." His voice trembled, something rare for a man who had learned since childhood to hide any emotion. Amara placed her hand on yours. "The past cannot be changed, Malik. But what you do now can change our son's future." He squeezed her hand in a shy, almost childish. The repressed desire, previously camouflaged by fear and pride, now mingled with an unexpected tenderness. Malik needed rebuild what had been destroyed. As the weeks passed, the palace had to adapt. Malik confronted the council, demanded respect for Amara and for her son. Safil tried to conspire by spreading poison, but the power of the newly formed family was stronger. In the face of every challenge, Malik showed his determination, and at Amara's side he learned that true strength was not in dominating with fear, but in Amara's bravery. Little by little, Amara was also transformed. The girl scared, marked by pain, she now looked at the world firmly. She found in herself an indomitable courage born of motherhood, faith, and love. Malik's presence, once a source of terror, now became a refuge. At night, while the child was sleeping, Malik sat on the edge of the bed with his face tired, eyes wet. "Tell me what I can do to fix what I did," he whispered. Amara hesitated. She wanted to forgive, but her still wounded heart begged for time. "I don't want gifts or power. I just want you to never turn your back on Orson. And if one day you can, look at me as a woman, not just as the memory of your sin." Malik nodded, moved. There, between words and silence, they began to rebuild the future. As the months passed, the family grew in harmony. Amara's son became a symbol of hope for many. Even among the servants, it was whispered that this child would bring a new era to the empire marked by the compassion and justice. Malik became a different man. He ruled with more humanity. He tried to reconcile conflicts with words, not just weapons. The people began to notice. The palace, once ruled by fear, now knew the weight of love. One spring morning, Malik gathered the council and officially presented his son as heir. Amara was at his side. Dressed with dignity, firm gaze, haughty posture, Safile and the favorites, defeated by love, bowed their heads. The council he didn't dare protest. The ceremony was moving. Malik held his son in front of the empire with tears in his eyes. "This is my son, blood of my blood, hope of our people. May God allow me to be worthy of him and of the woman who taught me to love." The people celebrated. The news spread through the markets. The streets reached the walls of the convent where Amara had once prayed alone. Now she was no longer the sacrificed nun, but the woman who bravely and painfully conquered a place in the heart of the most powerful man on earth. That night, Amara and Malik, they sat together watching their son sleep. The palace was silent. The stars shone brightly above. Malik took Amara's hand, this time without fear, shamelessly. "I promise you, and our son, that as long as I breathe, they will lack nothing." She smiled, with tears of gratitude fell. She finally felt free from the weight of the past, ready to live in the present. Repressed desire gave way to a sweet, mature passion, made of knowing glances, sincere words, respect, and affection. What was born from suffering now flourished like a garden after the rain. Over time, the three became inseparable. The boy grew strong, loved, respected by all. Amara became Malik's advisor, inspiration for other women, symbol of hope for young women trapped within the walls of the arena. Aten, the faithful servant, she became the guardian of the family, a living witness of redemption. Every spring, Malik took Amara and her son to the garden where it all began. There they renewed vows of love and protection, grateful for the opportunity to start over. The whispers of rebellion were extinguished, defeated by the silent power of faith, forgiveness, and courage. The empire, once marked through fear, he learned from the example of that family to seek justice and compassion and hope. And so, between pain and miracles, a new story is born. The story of a sultan who found redemption in the eyes of his son, of a nun who discovered her own strength, and about a boy who changed everyone's destiny. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you liked it, subscribe. Follow the channel so you don't miss any more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you think. I'll leave you another story, exciting, at the bottom of the screen for you to watch. See you next video.